Welcome to this episode of Better Life Today. I am very pleased to welcome a pastor of ours from the Brookings and Gold Beach churches, Barry Kimbrough. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So
Great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And it's not a quick jaunt to get into town, is it?
About 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours to get in. So you're a little bit isolated out there.
Well, you know, we've got an ocean on one side of us that limits how far we can go west, and we're right on the edge there. And getting out here is nice to get some shopping and do some things, but it takes a bit of effort to get out here and some time and planning. And
right.
So.
Well, I am really glad to have you in here. We have so many unique communities around the region. And my wife and I, our family, we love to come out to Brookings and enjoy the coast, the weather. It's cooler out there. In fact, I enjoy riding my motorcycle. And I remember, I think it was just this last spring, riding out there and all dressed. It wasn't spring because it was one of those days where it was in the 90s and 100, and got to Gold Beach and I about froze. So it's like a whole nother world out there.
It is, and it can be just beautiful weather, warm and sunny, and it can be cold and overcast and rainy. Depends on the time of the year, and it changes, but it's a beautiful place to live.
Right. Well, how long have you been there? I'm curious.
We've been there for 3 years.
Okay.
3.5 really now. We came most recently from West Virginia, where I pastored for several years, and before that Massachusetts for many years. But I'm originally from the West Coast.
Okay.
So it was a little bit like coming home.
Right.
And we just really like this part of the country.
It is absolutely beautiful, but just like everywhere, the needs really don't change. And so I'm thankful. I'm thankful that we have thriving and active churches out there. It's been an interesting couple of years. We've been dealing with COVID and some other issues. How have you seen that impact your communities?
We have had to adjust to it because of course, there was a period of time when we couldn't do in-person service at all. And I had never heard of Zoom before this.
Yeah.
I learned real fast.
Oh yes, how?
And now we're like experts at Zoom meetings. They don't even want to do in-person board meetings anymore. And then eventually, of course, when we got back to in-person, everything's changed. You know, we don't have as many people, like the same for all churches. But we just learned to keep in touch with people.
Right.
And we learned some of the electronic media for that. And we also learned that we have to go back to some tried and true things like sending stuff right through the mail, because not everybody does internet, not everybody does Zoom. And so on all fronts, we've been expanding our ways of keeping in touch with people.
Right, yeah, we get comfortable doing the things we're used to, and you get thrown a curveball, and it's a real opportunity, I feel, that God has given us to adjust and continue to find ways to connect with people.
It helps us to reach more people. You know, when we're doing live streaming, and we get people from even other countries sometimes responding to our church services, and learn how to do it. In fact, I've turned my living room into a TV studio.
Really?
For a big part when we were doing everything from home.
Right.
And my wife was gracious enough to allow that. But we learned some things about how to do that. So.
Right. Well, as you well know, Better Life is there as well. On that motorcycle trip, I stayed in Brookings, and I turned on the television in the hotel and was pleasantly greeted by Better Life Today. And so I'm just curious, that's been in the community for a long time. How has that impacted you and your ministry, having Better Life?
It's had a great impact. It has had a great impact. Just this last Sabbath at church, someone who was visiting the church and actually has been attending for a number of months informed me for the first time that it was because of Better Life TV that he started coming to the church last year. And I was not aware of that as for the TV station having an impact and part of his decision. We have another lady, a senior woman who has been attending church and had made some friends with some church members, And she too has been watching for a number of years, I found out, in giving Bible studies in her home. And then another gentleman who started watching, who lives in Brookings, and actually sent in a donation and asked for a Bible. And so Doug Garcia called me and told me that someone had sent in a donation and was asking for a Bible. So I suggested to him, well, let me deliver the Bible to him, because you can send it to him in the mail, but this would give me an opportunity to meet this gentleman.
Right.
Which I did do, and he really, really appreciated this Bible, and he decided to start coming to the church more. He actually had come to the church once before that, but he was coming more and more after that.
Right.
So a little personal touch made a difference.
It makes all the difference.
And so we've just had a great experience with Better Life TV in our area. I know that a lot more people watch it than we have any idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking for Better Life, we love the partnership. You know, I look at it as the body of Christ. You know, we have all of these parts that we want to function together. And so one of my favorite things is when we get a call from a community that we know, well, Pastor Barry's in that area, so let's give him a call, and we continue that conversation and hopefully transfer them from just being a viewer of Better Life and learning to actually participating in our churches.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. I think, even in the Bible, you have something that might be compared to television ministry. God gave a video presentation, if you will, to Nebuchadnezzar. And he saw a vision of that metal man, but he didn't know what it was. He needed Daniel to come alongside and explain it to him. And I often think about how media works that way. It's a visual experience. It's a vision, if you will, that people can have by watching. But then we make friends. We have add the personal touch, and many people can receive Christ and become part of the body of Christ through that connection.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
I think that's very appropriate. So tell me a little bit about you and your story. What brought you to the ministry?
I come from a background of church involvement. My parents were Christians. My mother was someone who loved to do music in the church. And my father joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church when he was a young boy, when his mother attended some evangelistic meetings down in Southern California. So this was all that I knew growing up. But of course, there comes a time when your faith becomes personal for you.
That's right.
It's no longer just what your parents pass on to you. And when I was 14, I remember thinking to myself that I really want to find some answers for some problems that I see in the world. And even we had some real challenges and some problems in my own family growing up. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a way somewhere that there's some solution. I really didn't know what it was. But that summer, I attended a summer camp meeting, we call it, in Central California. And they had a speaker there that was just outstanding at presenting Jesus in a way that teenagers could relate to.
Right.
And I listened to those messages, and I really had not tuned into preaching very well before that. But at that meeting and listening to those messages, it was the beginning of a journey for me. And I actually felt the call to the ministry at the same time that I felt God calling me at that time to give my life personally to Jesus.
And this is when you were 14?
I was 14.
Wow.
Yeah, so I never had any doubt, what will I do? What will I study? What will I train for? I always knew what it would be, and it just kind of grew. And so now it's been about 30 years. And it's a great adventure. It's exciting to work for God.
Right. Yeah, there's certainly surprises all the time. And what better way? What better way to live your life, whether that's your career or not, but just being able to share the joy and peace that you have found with other people, and then for that to be your career, that's just a whole nother level of wonderful.
Well, one of the things that I've learned is that a pastor is only effective in connection to the church members that he has in his church. And church members, lay people, actually have a little bit of an advantage sometimes when it comes to sharing their faith, because they're not professional religious people. And other people know that whatever they believe, whatever they do, that's really real for them. That's very sincere. They're not getting paid for it. And I like to tell the church that, you all have an advantage in leading souls to Christ. There might be some people out there that would think of me and say, well, yeah, you want us to come to your church. You're a pastor. It's going to make you look good. And I know not everybody thinks that way, but there might be someone that does. But nobody will think that way about a church member. And so I've been blessed. I've had so many good church parishioners and church members over the years, leaders. They help lead and do what I can't do. I like to have people who are good at things even that I'm not as good at.
Right.
And we work as a team.
So how do you do that? How do you develop that team? Because they still need training and leadership. So what does that process look in your community?
One of the most important things is building relationships with the church members. So when I come to a church, I'm very anxious to meet people outside of the worship hour setting. If all you did was come and sit and listen to a sermon once a week and that's all the involvement you had, that wouldn't be really personal interaction. So I like to visit with the members, get out, sometimes visit in their homes, or even if it's after church at a potluck, or wherever they'd like to meet. I've done visits in restaurants. I've done Bible studies in all kinds of varieties of locations. And when I work with people, just getting to know them and working with them on projects together, we do some community service events. We do food ministries in both of our churches, and we do all kinds of different types of things. And after a while, you develop that working relationship, and not just that, but a real friendship, a fellowship.
Right.
And the church brings people together who may not have a lot in common, but they should have one thing in common, their faith. And it teaches us to appreciate different kinds of people.
Absolutely. It sounds an awful lot like discipleship to me.
It is a process of learning to be a disciple of Jesus, like what Jesus did with the 12. That's right.
That's right. And hopefully that's a journey we're all on, whether we're coming in via television. We want to always be progressing toward one another and toward Jesus.
That phrase, one another, it's used over and over in the Bible. Lots of texts like that. So, yeah, you want to have a community of faith that you can be a part of. And I don't really know how you could be a Christian according to the Bible and not have some connection with a community. All the New Testament is all letters to churches and counsels about getting along and
right, which
sharing
isn't
your
always
faith.
easy. I mean, we're a family, right?
Sometimes there can be some challenges. We all bring different backgrounds, and different ideas about what's important, and you get people with widely divergent views, on a church board.
Oh yeah.
It helps to understand the background, and you can work together.
Right, absolutely. Well, we're going to dig a little deeper into discipleship and your experiences in your community. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this. Stay tuned.
Better Life Broadcasting is a viewer-supported Christian media ministry that offers streaming programming via apps on various devices. Please visit blbn.org to support Better Life or to get more information. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome back. I'm just very blessed to be speaking with Pastor Barry Kimbrough of the Gold Beach and Brookings churches. So welcome back. Right before the break, we were talking about your conversion story, how 14 years old and you're going to these camp meetings, which are just a big get together where you're just learning about Christ and just kind of a deep dive. And how did you continue that? What happened next?
Well, the first thing I did was I started reading the Bible for myself. And I got a Bible that had a wide margin so that I could write little notes in. And I was so thrilled to read verses that I had heard quoted from the pulpit or other places, but now I'm reading them for myself. And I remember the first time that I found one of those verses, I was just so amazed, like, wow, it's really there. And I'm reading it on my own and not somebody else telling me about it.
Right. And that, to me, that's really important because in the history of mankind, that hasn't always been the case. There were times where having a Bible was, you just couldn't get them. It was punishable. And so here we live in an age where we can go down to the store and just pick one up.
We have so many Bibles in this country. I think like the average house has 3 or 4 Bibles, something like that.
And so very few of them probably read.
That, unfortunately, but I found a lot of encouragement in the Bible, and I've memorized whole books of the Bible, chapters, and many verses, and God has just really blessed me with that. But I think that another thing that helped a lot was that about a year after I really met Jesus for myself, at that camp meeting the summer I was 14, my mother suggested that I should join up with a student literature evangelist program that was going to be happening in the summer. And I didn't really know anything about that, but I thought, well, it sounds interesting. So there was going to be a training week up at an academy in Northern California. And I went there, and there were all these young people, and they all want to go out and share their faith and earn some money for college, and I was so inspired. And then I started going door to door in my own neighborhood with this big briefcase full of books. And I learned that door-to-door ministry and door-to-door sales is a challenging work because...
Well, challenging, but I would think I probably speak for quite a few people that sounds absolutely terrifying.
Well, it always was, I was a little afraid in the morning, when I would get started. But after I would knock on a few doors, I kind of get into a rhythm and it wouldn't be so bad. But the great thing about it, and I didn't really sell that many books that summer. I was 14 or 15 and I was small for my age. And I remember I went to one house and there was a Christian minister that was visiting his church members, and they were all standing out in the driveway of this house, and he looked at me and he looked at the books, and I had the Bible story and I had some health books, and he said, "Young man," he said, I think you ought to focus on those story books. He said, you're very young, and that is appropriate, for your age and your development to sell those books. I think you'll do good if you focus on those." So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing for him to say, and it was really true. But I had so many experiences sharing my faith. I remember in one house, I would ask people, could I have a prayer with you before I leave? And I had a prayer with this one lady, and she looked up at me and she said, "That's amazing. I've never read that prayer before."
Really?
Because it was just an extemporaneous prayer,
Right.
And she was evidently from a church that had a prayer book. And so that was one of many different experiences I had, and those are still with me today. So sharing your faith, it drives you to pray. I prayed so much when I was doing that door-to-door work.
Right.
And you don't have to be a door-to-door literature evangelist to feel the need for prayer. Anytime you get involved with any kind of outreach ministry project where you're going to share your faith, you're going to serve other people, you will feel the need for prayer.
Absolutely.
And prayer and Bible study and sharing your faith, these are, kind of like exercise and oxygen and all the things we need for our physical health,
Right.
what we need for our spiritual health.
Amen. And I'll share a secret here. I mean, here we probably look pretty comfortable and everything, but beforehand, I'm a little nervous every time. And if I go speak somewhere, I'm not a trained speaker like you are, and there is that nervousness. And the blessing is that it drives you to Jesus. And then you get started, and He's with you, and it turns out to be an absolute blessing. So I'm grateful for the opportunities we have to exercise those muscles, even when, again, for a lot of us, the public speaking, those kind of engagements are very, very frightening.
Well, one of my favorite little quotes that I like to collect says, "A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not why ships are made."
Oh, I like that.
Got to open up the sails and head out to sea.
Right. And that's what you've done. So where did you begin your journey as a pastor?
My first ministry after college was in Idaho,
Okay.
here in the Great Northwest.
Uh-huh.
I had a little church there in McCall, which is a beautiful resort town. And they've got a lake and a ski resort and everything. But a lot of people live there, and I pastored in that little church for a year. And I was doing the literature ministry also a couple days a week. So I actually knocked on every door in 3 towns, including the town of McCall, that year. But I had responsibility for the church, preached every week. And over the years, I've moved to different places. I've pastored in California, near where I grew up, in Hemet, California. I've moved to the East Coast. I've pastored for 15 years in New England, Massachusetts.
Right.
And I learned that Plymouth and Lexington and those places are actually alive and well. They're not just in a history
Right.
book.
There's a whole nother level of history in that area of the country.
Oh, so much history out
Yeah.
there. Boston and all those states. And I really enjoyed New England. But some of the best years I had in soul winning were there. Some people told me that it's going to be really hard to, find people to come to church out here in New England because people have lived here forever. Our neighbors across the street told us our family has been in this town for 300 years. A lot of times people like that, they're satisfied with what they have. They don't want to change too much. But very nice people, and we've had great experiences in ministry in Massachusetts. I have experienced Appalachia, pastored in West Virginia for 4 years, and got my experience with that. That was a whole new experience, very different than New England. And then a door of opportunity opened up for us to come out to Oregon 3 years ago. So we prayed about that, and it seemed like it was an open door, and we decided to come, and we're really glad we did.
Right.
We've just had a great time. We love our churches, hope to have a longer stay where we are.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And you look back at life, and it's a journey. But sometimes when you're in the middle, I'm sure there have been some situations where maybe a church wasn't the easiest or a community was a little bit challenging. So I'm just curious, in your journey, how has God used each step? Can you point to anything where God really used something to build you for what was coming next?
Well, there are difficulties that sometimes can come up when you're working with people. But one thing I've learned as a pastor is I talk to my church members, they tell me about their jobs and some of the problems that they have to deal with, and I just think, wow, I can see that this is a human thing. Mm-hmm. It isn't just about churches or about other, religious groups or anything. There's always going to be some challenges because we're human beings. We are sort of, been out of shape sometimes by our past, and we don't always know how to get along. But what I've found is that when you engage with people and you serve people and you get to know people, you often discover that there are new kinds of people that you didn't understand, and you learn about them. You can become close with people that you never thought you would ever be close to. You can develop friendships with people that you never thought you would ever be able to make friends with. And you know, most people who attend church, they love their pastors, and they want to work with you, and you know, they're just wonderful blessing. On a rare occasion, if there's a situation where maybe someone, you know, is going to push your buttons, then you know, it's kind of like I read a book by a politician. And this politician said, your enemies will tell you things that your friends don't want to tell you. So I always figure, you know, I don't care if people have something to say to me. If they're going to be nice about it, great. If they're not, I still probably could benefit to hear what they say.
Right.
Because I want to know, you know, what people think, and I want to grow as a Christian. When people ask me, how do you like being a pastor? I say the joys of serving God as a pastor, the thrill of serving God as a pastor is greater than I ever could have imagined that it would be before I became a pastor. And also the challenges, the difficulties, those are also greater than I ever could have dreamed that they would be.
That's right.
But God blesses us in both of those types of things, situations. And He provides support, He provides strength, He provides people. And we grow closer to Him. And everything's an opportunity for growth.
That's right. Pastor Barry, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just a blessing always to be reminded about how Jesus will work with us in our journey toward Him and the opportunity we have to share Him with others. And folks, as we go our separate ways, we're going to go ahead and put Pastor Barry's contact information up. So if you're in one of those communities and would like to reach out, come visit a service or something. We're here for you, and so is He. God bless you. Have a great day.